In time today. I'm going to spend today again talking about Mobius transformations, and I'd given some kind of write-up about it last time. First of all, do you have any questions of what I had done last time? Okay. Someone has. Ankit. Yeah. No, Ankit doesn't have. Anyone have questions? I mean, the point is that the Mobius transformations are, in some sense, the simplest kind of maps that you can consider. Okay, which are, I mean, after all, translations, rotations, and inversions are, in some sense, the simplest things that you can do, and it is always good to have a family of functions that does a lot of things for you. Okay, this again is sort of a natural thing to, this is again a natural objective that you have. We are talking about a certain family of functions, namely holomorphic functions. We must think of the simplest set of functions that are holomorphic, and the simplest set of functions are translations, dilations, and inversions. And therefore I want to compose these set of functions. And when I compose these set of functions, I get these Mobius transformations. And yeah, by the way, each of the functions, translation, dilation, inversion, is invertible. Okay, and I can compose them, and the things I get are Mobius transformations of that kind. And then, of course, I have to be careful that every Mobius transformation can be written as a composition of translation, dilations, rotations. And this again is something very natural. I want to emphasize that this is very natural, and this you should try to do whenever you're trying to introduce a new family of functions. You should have some basic examples, and you should play around with these basic examples to see what you can do. Okay, so that is the idea here. Now we are trying to understand what are the properties about Mobius transformations, and it turns out Mobius transformations have lots of very interesting properties, and there is there's a whole bunch of theory that is associated just to Mobius transformations. So let's see, where was I last time? So this is, no, I don't want to talk about this first. I think I want to talk about this first, 18. Okay, so I was somewhere here. Okay, when I stopped last time, it had something to do with, so as I said, I am not going to prove these statements. Okay, the proof of these statements, there are two things involved. The proof of these statements are quite straightforward. Okay, they're not at all difficult. And if I try to prove these statements, if I try to prove all these statements as you go along, okay, there's much less that can be done, and maybe you will not benefit from a slightly different perspective of complex analysis than maybe what you have been exposed to, because I'm sure most of these ideas have already been taught to you in your MSc courses and maybe beginning PhD courses. Okay, but they might not have been taught to you in this manner. Okay, you might not have thought that certain things are very important, which you normally would not see. Okay, so that is the idea behind these series of lectures. That the idea is that yes, you must be introduced to all these theorems that you have in complex analysis, but you should be introduced to them in a way in which you probably have not seen earlier, and probably in a perspective that will sort of lead you to think about this subject and other subjects in a slightly different manner. Okay, so even if you at the end of this you start thinking about complex analysis, more geometrically, that itself will be quite a achievement in this course. By the way, there are lots and lots of very interesting softwares that are available which tell you how to visualize problems in which tell you how to visualize things in complex analysis. Okay, and that is a very important kind of thing to do. Now, at your generation, most of you must be familiar by now with Python. Okay, and maybe even these other free softwares that are available, namely Maple, Scilab, and whatever. And all these softwares have routines which allow you to visualize. And this is the big thing about mathematical softwares. They will allow you to visualize certain things. And I hope you will start playing around with these softwares, the complex analysis visualization softwares. One of the best softwares that I had mentioned some time ago, it's a software called FZ. Little f, open bracket, little z, close bracket. Okay, and if you just type it in, you will find the software. I believe now there might be some charge for it, but I'm sure there'll be some free period that you can look into it. But there are other softwares that are free, which you can download very easily and start playing around with it. I mean, there's a software which actually tells you exactly what these functions do. Okay, sine z. I had asked this question last time. What happens to sine z? What happens to cos z? What happens to e to the z? Okay, these kind of things. So I hope maybe I can ask Sagar and Kaushik if they can find out something more about. There are very nice pictures that can be shared about these softwares, and you will see that there are connections between this elementary complex analysis and highly non-trivial problems in mechanics and fluid mechanics and elliptic function theory and whatever you call it. So anyway, I think it comes somewhere here. Okay, I was trying to emphasize that Mobius transformations, where were we? We had some conformal map, and I said that every holomorphic function is conformal. Okay, and then we had talked about fractional linear transformations and Mobius transformations. And then I had asked you to verify that these Mobius transformations have a group structure. Okay, so there is this connection between what we are talking about and a group structure. And I'll say a little bit more about that. Maybe I should say it right now. Why not? Why later? So there is actually a very natural connection between Mobius transformations and linear transformations on the affine space. Okay, so actually these Mobius transformations are actually linear. And in what sense are they linear? Obviously, as you look at it, the way they're written down, they're not linear. Okay, but if you think about linear maps on the affine space or on homogeneous coordinates or on, so I shouldn't say affine space, I should say look at linear transformations on homogeneous C2, okay, or look at linear transformations on what are called projective coordinates, okay, then these Mobius transformations are exactly linear transformations in that space. So let me just say that a bit, okay. So this is, I have not yet circulated these 3 pages, but I was writing them just now because I'm wondering what to do today. But anyway, this is also another perspective that is very important. And those of you who are going to do any kind of algebra or any kind of algebraic geometry or any kind of dynamical systems also have to start worrying about what I'm saying here. So what are homogeneous coordinates? If you have a complex number, there are two ways of describing this complex number, which are very different from each other. Okay, the complex number can be represented by this x plus iy. Okay, x and y are real. Okay, it can also be represented by that complex number z is equal to z1 plus z2, and by z1 by the way I will represent z1 divided by z2 is this bracket z1 and z2, where I have an equivalence relation which says that z1 z2 is the equivalence class of all kz1 kz2, where k is not equal to 0 and k is in C. Okay, so when I look at this equivalence class, that equivalence class is actually supposed to be mapped into, is actually to be thought of as the point z1 divided by z2 if z2 is not equal to 0. And if z2 is equal to 0, that equivalence class corresponds to exactly 1 point. Okay, and that is a point infinity. So this is a way of homogenizing coordinates. Okay, and this is again an idea that arises in many different contexts. Okay, so I can think of z in homogeneous coordinates as this point z1 z2 equivalence class, and this equivalence class, of course, is, I mean, it's what I'm actually doing is I'm taking C2 and dividing it by something. Okay, dividing it by this equivalence relation. And that is a space that I want to identify with C. And in this identification, the point infinity is also there. Okay, because the trouble is that how do you add? Okay, how do you multiply? Multiplication is not a problem. The problem is how do you add here? So there are advantages and disadvantages of this homogeneous coordinates. Okay, z2 not equal to 0 corresponds to exactly one complex number, and I can think of C2 as this z1 z2 with this equivalence class, and this thing now includes infinity. What is a linear transformation on this z2 on this C2? A linear transformation is a map which takes z1 z2 in homogeneous coordinates and give you w1 w2 in homogeneous coordinates. And what is w1 w2 in terms of z1 z2? It is az1 plus bz2 divided by it is the pair w1 w2. The pair w1 w2 is the pair az1 plus bz2 let me say this again. The linear transformation on C2 is z1 z2 going to w1 w2. w1 is equal to az1 plus bz2, and w2 is cz1 plus dz2. Okay, and remember this pair actually corresponds, the left hand side corresponds to the number, to the complex number z1 divided by z2, and the right hand side corresponds, it's a pair, it's a homogeneous coordinate. The homogeneous coordinate of which point in C2? In C. It is the point az1 plus bz2 divided by cz1 plus dz2. Okay, and there I can divide by z2, so you get a z1 by z2 plus b divided by c z1 by z2 plus d. But z1 by z2 is w. Okay, and therefore it is aw plus b over cw plus d. And this elementary sort of idea tells you that Mobius transformations are actually linear maps on the homogeneous space. Okay, this is a Mobius transformation, and this actually is a linear map on the homogeneous space that I have there. And these homogeneous coordinates are called projective coordinates, and some of you, I'm sure, will be worried a great deal about homogeneous coordinates, and not just in algebraic geometry, but also in large parts of physics, including relativity of all things. Okay, and this is an interesting what should one say? It's an interesting geometric fact that two vectors in C2 are orthogonal. Orthogonal, you mean what? There's an inner product in C2. Okay, what is the inner product? It's that Z1, Z2 inner product of W1, W2 is equal to. Now, this also is a difference. Okay, I mean, if you look at any mathematics books, if you have a vector space over the field of complex numbers and you have an inner product on the space, Hilbert space, say, if you have an inner product on a Hilbert space over complex numbers, then the inner product is not bilinear. The inner product is, the term used is sesquilinear. Okay, bilinear means two linear, linear means linear. Okay, bilinear means two linear. And what we have is something, if it is a complex over the complex field, what we have that the inner product is what is called 1.5 times linear. So sesquilinear. And what does that mean? It means that it is linear in one variable and conjugate linear in the second variable. All of you have seen this, I'm sure, in a Hilbert space, inner product. The inner product is linear in the first variable and it is conjugate linear in the second variable. Okay. So what was I trying to say? I was trying to tell you that if you have the complex vector space in any mathematics book, if you open any book in mathematics and it's talking about a complex Hilbert space, the inner product is always linear in the first variable and conjugate linear in the second variable. All of you have seen this earlier. If you open up any physics book, okay, any book in physics, and you're talking about a complex Hilbert space, then the inner product in that complex Hilbert space in physics is always conjugate linear in the first variable and linear in the second variable. Okay, so this is something that you must keep in mind. Are you reading a physics book or are you reading a mathematics book? What is the notation that you want to use? In physics, inner products are conjugate linear in the first variable and they are linear in the second variable. In mathematics, inner products are linear in the first variable and conjugate linear in the second variable. And therefore, when, you know, if you're reading a physics book and you come across this bra and the cat, that bra and the cat, you have to be careful of where is it linear and where is it conjugate linear. This is an important point. Anyway, so what do I want to say here? I want to say that two vectors in C2 are orthogonal if and only if they are homogeneous coordinates of antipodal points in the Riemann sphere. What are antipodal points? What are antipodal points? No, yes. If you have a sphere, when are 2 points on a sphere said to be antipodal?
When one is the negative of the other.
What do you mean? I know. So negative is correct, but what are you trying to say? You're saying that the straight line joining that point to the center of the sphere, okay, you have a point, 2 points in the sphere, and they're antipodal if, you know, negative is not quite nice to say because it's not quite geometric enough. And if you want to have only geometric, then what do you say?
Pass through the same line, maybe.
They pass through?
They lie on the same line. Both
Any
points
2
lie on
points?
one line passing through the origin.
So the important
at the origin.
the important part is that the straight line joining these 2 points passes through the origin. Okay, passes through the center of the sphere. So 2 points are called antipodal if the straight 2 points on the sphere are called antipodal if the straight line joining these 2 points passes through the center of the sphere. Okay, so the point is that there is some very nice geometric there is a lot of geometric business that is involved here, and I hope that I'll say more and more about this as time goes on. Okay, so the point here is that homogeneous coordinates are also natural, and they're natural in many contexts, and linear maps in these homogeneous coordinates actually are Mobius transformations. So that is why Mobius transformations has very close connections with linear maps. Okay, so this was one of the comments. So I'll come back to this a bit later on. Let me get, no, I'm here, no? So I should go here. And that is why there is a great deal of, group theory that is going on here, 2 by 2. So Mobius transformations are immediately connected to SL2C. Okay, SL2C is what? I've written it here. SL2C are all invertible. I've forgotten a bracket there. They're invertible 2 by 2 matrices, entries in complex numbers, whose determinant is 1. Okay, and this map from phi from to SL2C to M, Mobius transformations, is 1 to 1. Is on to. It's not 1 to 1. Okay, because you know that if you multiply all the coefficients by a certain scalar, any scalar, diagonal scalar of absolute value 1, then the determinant. Anyway, let me not get into that. So Mobius transformations are all these things. This is an onto homomorphism. What is its kernel? And this is a series of exercises, okay, which tell you properties about Mobius transformations. Okay, these are actually very interesting exercises, and this is why SL2C or Mobius transformations are important. Okay, and the outline of this proof is given in Conway. I hope you will have a look at it. Okay, I'm forgetting what I had done last time and what I'm doing now, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So S of Z is this. We define it on C union infinity by the natural way. And every Mobius transformation is a composition of these things. Composition of these things is a Mobius transformation. And this is saying that every Mobius transformation is a composition of these translations, dilations, and inversions. Okay, I had made a fuss about this last time. How many fixed points do they have? If you have a fixed point, as I said, this should have been a Z naught, S Z naught equal to Z naught. You get C Z naught squared plus D minus A Z naught plus B equal to 0. And therefore, it's a quadratic in Z naught, and therefore you can have at most 2 possible Z naughts. And therefore, S can have at most 2 fixed points. And then if you have 3 fixed points, or you have a Mobius transformations S and T, which take the same value at 3 distinct points, then they are the same. Then we have this cross ratio. And it turns out that this cross ratio is actually, if you're given 3 points A, B, C in the complex plane, then this cross ratio is important. You see, the point here is that you can take, if you fix 3 points, then there exists a unique Mobius transformations. And the natural 3 points to think about, and if you say that 3 points go to 3 points, A1, B1, C1 go to A2, B2, C2, then there exists a unique Mobius transformation, okay, which maps A1 to A2, B1 to B2, and C1 to C2. Now, what are the 3 points which are special points in the complex plane? I should say extended complex plane. I hope you understand that there are exactly 3 special points in the complex plane, okay? And the 3 special points are 1, 0, and infinity, okay? I mean, this again is something that you should understand, that if you have something like this, what are the special points? And you will understand that these are the only 3 special points, okay? This set 1, 0, infinity, okay, does not change when you take inverses. Inverse of 1 is 1, inverse of 0 is infinity, inverse of infinity is 0, okay? So this set, these 3 points do not change when under the map inversion. Okay. So I have this 1, 0, infinity, and you're given any 3 points A, B, and C. There exists a unique map which takes ABC to 1, 0, infinity, which is this map. Okay. And S of F, if you're given ABC, look at the unique map which takes ABC to 1, 0, infinity. And the image under that unique map of any point F, any point Z, is called the cross ratio. Have I written that down? I haven't written. That is called the cross ratio. I'm wondering how I have not written down. Okay, so this is the cross ratio of F with A, B, and C. Okay. So what is the cross ratio? You take the points A, B, and C. These are 3 distinct points in complex numbers. So you have 3 distinct complex numbers. There exists a unique Mobius transformation that maps ABC to 1, 0, infinity. Call that Mobius transformation S, and the image of F. Have I not written this down? I've written it down. I have written it down. Okay. So the unique Mobius transformation that takes ABC to 1, 0, infinity is denoted by this bracket, Z comma ABC. Okay. Which is Z minus A, Z minus B over Z minus C divided by A minus B over A minus C. And this is called the cross ratio of Z with ABC. Okay. So remember, cross ratios are given by what? You take 3 points ABC, map them to 1, 0, infinity by a Mobius transformation, and that image of that point F or Z under the Mobius transformation is called the cross ratio of Z with respect to ABC, or it's called the cross ratio of Z ABC. Okay. And these are immediate sort of consequence. They're not immediate. There's something to be proved here. And as I said over and over again, I'm not going to be proving these statements. These statements are standard statements, which, again, require a little bit of work. But I hope you will put in the effort to understand this, because these statements, as I said, as I'm saying over and over again, are important. Okay. The cross ratio is a real number if and only if these 4 points lie on a circle. Remember, if you have any 3 distinct points in the plane, okay, there exists a unique circle that passes through those 3 points. Yes. So if you have any other point, okay, if the point is on a circle, is on that given circle, something must be true. And if the point is not on the given circle, something. So the cross ratio is a real number if and only if these points lie on the circle. A Mobius transformation takes straight circles to circles. Actually, I should have written there that a Mobius transformation takes circles and straight lines to circles and straight lines. So here, when I say a circle, I also mean a straight line through infinity. I also mean straight lines, because straight lines are circles which pass through infinity. Okay. So all these are properties about Mobius transformations, and I hope you understand that these are geometric properties of Mobius transformations. Okay, or geometric properties of these maps. Okay. So something is a real number if and only if these lie on a circle. A Mobius transformation takes circles to circles. If you have 2 circles, remember 2 circles are determined by 3 points, non-collinear points. Of course, if they're collinear, then the circle is a straight line. If C1 and C2 are circles and ABC is in C1 and A to B to C2 is in C2, then there exists a unique Mobius transformation such that C1 maps to C2. because a circle, okay, Mobius transform adds circles to circles, so the image is a circle and it takes these 3 points to those 3 points, and therefore C1 must be mapped to C2. Remember what one is saying here. We are saying you have 2 circles, C1 and C2. A1, B1, C1 is in the first circle. A2, B2, C2 is in the second circle. And you have a Mobius transformation which takes A1 to A2, B1 to B2, C1 to C2. But the circle passing through A1, B1, C1, it has to be mapped to a circle. Okay. So it has to be mapped to a circle which passes through A2, B2, and C2. But then it's a unique circle which passes through A2, B2, and C2. And therefore, the circle which passes through A1, B1, and C1, which is C1, must be mapped to C2. I mean, this is just playing around with words that you're doing here. Okay. And here, so what happens if the cross ratio, if any one of the ABC are infinity, you must think about it. And this is again something that I think in that first problem session people had trouble with. Okay, if you have a straight line gamma and you're given a point Z, okay, when do we say that a point Z star and Z are symmetric with respect to gamma? Maybe I shouldn't have called it Z star because star may mean something else. I should call it Z tilde or something, or I should call it A and B. Okay, so there's a natural notion of symmetry that we have here, that we say that the points Z and Z star are symmetric with respect to the straight line gamma. Okay, if so what is the definition and what is the theorem? Okay, so I will define Z and Z star are 2 points. Okay, and gamma is determined by Z2, Z3, Z4. And I will say Z and Z star are symmetric with respect to gamma if the cross ratio of Z star, Z2, Z3, Z4, is the complex conjugate of the cross ratio of Z and Z2, Z3, Z4. So Z and Z star are symmetric with respect to gamma if you choose 3 distinct points in gamma, Z2, Z3, Z4. Okay. And we say that they're symmetric if the cross ratio of Z, Z2, Z3, Z4, and the cross ratio are of Z star, Z2, Z3, Z4 are complex conjugates. Again, here you have to be slightly careful. In what way? It looks as if I'm talking about Z and Z star are symmetric with respect to gamma. How am I defining it? I'm defining it with a choice of 3 points Z2, Z3, Z4 which are in gamma. Obviously, I may choose 3 points Z2, Z3, Z4 in gamma, but gamma has many points. You may choose Z3 tilde, you may choose Z2 tilde, Z3 tilde, Z4 tilde to be some other points in gamma. And I will say that Z and Z star, in my case with Z2, Z3, Z4 are symmetric. And then the question is, how are you sure that when you choose Z2 tilde, Z3 tilde, Z4 tilde, then Z and Z star are still symmetric? In other words, what do I want to say? I want to say that this definition should not depend on the choice of the points Z2, Z3, Z4 in gamma. I mean, this is something I've said this earlier also, that we are making a definition on the basis of a choice of points Z2, Z3, Z4. The choices that different people will make of Z2, Z3, Z4 may be different. But the definition should not depend on the choices that you make. Okay? And then and only then will be a good definition. So the first thing you have to check is that this definition does not depend on the choice of Z2, Z3, Z4 in gamma. Then this definition is well defined. You know, this actually is sort of a subtle point that sometimes gets hidden. When you make a definition, you don't realize that you're making a definition on the basis of a choice that you have made. Okay. Then, of course, the definition will depend on the choice. For it to make sense, you have to be sure that the definition does not depend on the choice. Okay. So the first statement is that this does not depend on the choice. And that comes from this sort of geometric fact in some way, that if gamma is a straight line, then Z and Z star are symmetric with respect to gamma if Z star is the reflection of Z in gamma. Gamma is a straight line, and we know what we mean by the reflection of a point in a line. Be slightly careful there. We know what we mean by the reflection. I mean, we are talking in this plane, in the complex plane. We have a line in the complex plane, gamma, straight line. Line, I mean a straight line. We have a straight line in the complex plane, gamma. Okay, and then we know what we mean by the reflection in gamma. Now, I think in that first set of exercises, page 1, 2, 3, somewhere I had talked about reflection in a line, in a plane. You take a line in a plane, R2, and you take the reflection of a point in that line. And the generalization, of course, was in R3, what was it? You take a plane in R3 and take the reflection of a point in R3 in that plane. And what I understand, and then of course I can do this in any dimension. So you have Rn, okay, and in Rn, I have a n-1 dimensional plane, and you have a point in Rn, and I want to talk about the reflection of that point in the plane, in the hyperplane. Hyperplane is what? Rn is n-dimensional. A hyperplane is what? Hyperplane is a n-1 dimensional translation of a plane through the origin. Okay. So there was a notion of reflection. Again, this notion of reflection in a hyperplane, as I say over and over again, is quite important. And my feedback I got from Sagar and Kaushik was that most of you had a great deal of trouble writing down what the reflection of a point in Rn in a hyperplane in Rn is. Okay. So these reflections, please, this comes up over and over again. Please try to understand what is the meaning of a reflection of a point in Rn in a plane in Rn, hyperplane in Rn. You have to have a hyperplane, okay? Why do you have to have a hyperplane? Can I talk about the reflection of a point in R3 in a line in R3? Does that make sense? I can talk about the reflection of a point in R3 in a plane in R3. Can I talk about the reflection of a line, reflection of a point in R3 in a line in R3. Anyway, so what is this theorem supposed to be? The theorem is supposed to be that these 2 points Z and Z star are symmetric with respect to gamma in these cases. If gamma is a straight line in the complex plane, then Z and Z star are symmetric with respect to gamma. If join Z and Z star, okay, so this straight line Z star is perpendicular to gamma and the distances are the same to gamma, okay? They lie on different sides of gamma. And the other case is, so gamma is what? This is the case when gamma is a straight line, okay? And if gamma is a circle, what is the meaning of Z and Z star are symmetric? The meaning is, you look at Z and Z star and you're given this circle, gamma. So the circle has a center, okay? So what is the meaning of Z and Z star are symmetric? That means that the center, Z and Z star, lie on a straight line. One of the Z is inside, the other Z is outside. And you take the one inside, draw the perpendicular to that straight line, it will meet the circle at some point, and draw the straight line from Z star to that point. And this straight line is tangent to the circle at that point of intersection of this perpendicular, okay? Very interesting, isn't it? We have seen this kind of thing earlier. So the theorem is prove this when gamma is a circle or gamma is a straight line. So again, these proofs are very nice proofs, and one must look at these proofs again once in your lifetime. And I hope you use these ideas over and over again, but the proofs should be done to you, shown proofs you must write out and understand. By the way, the only way of understanding a proof is to write it out with your own hand. Okay, so even taking the book in front of you and copying the proof with your own hand will help you understand what the proof is in your own handwriting. Because the only way that you understand something is through the tips of your fingers, not through your eyes. Okay, so please keep this in mind. If you want to understand anything at all, please write it out. As I say, please write out these proofs. They're very standard. I mean, they're the important proofs and you must understand. So what is the symmetry principle? The symmetry principle says that if a Mobius transformation maps a circle to a circle, then any pair of points which are symmetric with respect to the first one are mapped to a pair of points which are symmetric with respect to the image. This sort of tells you a lot of restrictions, no? So the Mobius transformation maps symmetric points to symmetric points. And therefore this also says that with this, so this is what is called the symmetry principle. Okay. And Mobius transformations preserve orientation. What do I mean by orientation? You see, if you have a straight line, if you have the straight line which is the real axis, and you have 2 points. Any 2 points, therefore I choose a point 0 and 1 in the real axis. How many ways can I go from 0 to 1 along the real axis? And do you understand that I can go from 0 to 1 in 2 directions? I can either go from 0 to 1 on the right, or I can go from 0 to infinity and back to 1. Okay, so 2 points do not determine the orientation of that line. Similarly, if you have a circle, you take 2 points on the circle, A and B are on the unit circle, say 1 and -1 are on the unit circle. How can I go from 1 to -1? I can go along the upper part or I can go along the lower part. So 2 points do not determine the orientation. Whereas if I have 3 points, 0, 1, and 2, then 0, 1, and 2 determine an orientation, because I can go from 0 to 1 to 2, or I can go from 1 to I to -1 on the unit circle. That gives you the direction, orientation of that thing. Okay. An orientation is an ordered triple. If you have a circle, an orientation is an ordered triple where A, B, C in this. And what you're saying is that we go along gamma from A to B to C. Okay, this is the orientation on gamma. Okay, and then this is something with the cross ratio. Then the cross ratio maps R infinity to infinity, and therefore you can take the imaginary part. This is sort of, and the point with Mobius transformations is that Mobius transformations preserve orientation. Okay, the right sides of these things, of the right side of one circle or straight line is mapped to the right side of the circle or orientation. So Mobius transformation has this property that not only are circles and straight lines mapped to circles and straight lines, but the left side of that circle or straight line, once you're given that orientation, once you're given the orientation, you can talk about the left side. What is the left side? What is the left side? If you're given a straight line, real numbers, and you're given an orientation, the orientation is 0 to 1 to 2. What is the left side of that orientation? No. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? I'm given this real line. Okay. I'll suppose instead of taking the real axis, I take the line at 45 degrees. Okay. And I take 3 points on the line in the real axis at 45 degrees to the x-axis. So what are these 3 points? I'll take the points 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 2 in that order. So I'm given the orientation 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2 of that line at 45 degrees from the x-axis. Okay, and I'm given this orientation 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2. What is the left side of that line? What do I mean by the left side of that line with respect to this orientation? Yeah, Roshni, you have to know, you're not, everyone's muted. Is the question I'm asking clear?
Yes, so the question is clear, but I'm pictorially, I know what you're talking about.
How do you describe it? Now there's no picture in some sense. I want you to think about it pictorially, and I want you to describe it in words. What would you do? And why is it called left? And do you understand that you have come across this idea where all of you have seen Green's theorem? Yes? And in Green's theorem, you have something about left. Yes, some region, and then you go around that region, and this thing is in the left. You go around the region in the anti-clockwise direction, and the region is to the left. Correct?
Yes, sir.
So how would you describe this left if you're given the points 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 2 on that line which has 45 degrees to the x-axis, and this is the orientation 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2. what is left?
But the imaginary part of the number is greater than the real. No, that I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I should think before saying this.
Okay, I'll sort of leave this hanging. Okay. In the same way, as I've told you just now about Green's theorem, if you have a circle, for example, I'm given the circle, the unit circle, and I have 3 points on the unit circle, namely 1, I, and -1. Okay. And I'm saying this 1, I, and -1 give you an orientation. Now, what is the meaning of the left side of that left side on that unit circle?
So
This
will
is
it
this,
be
yeah.
outer part of the unit circle?
Why is it outer? Why have you told me outer?
Because we are going because of the given in orientation that you gave.
Then why is it the outer part?
Can you repeat the special points that
So
you mentioned?
the orientation I'm taking for the unit circle, the region I have is the unit circle, and the orientation I'm giving is 1, I, and -1. Then the left side will be what?
It will be anti-clockwise. You go from 1 to I and then I to -1 like that.
What is the left side of this curve?
So then it will be the inner part of the unit circle.
Do you understand? That is the idea. And why are you saying this?
Because when I traverse the orientation from 1 I and -I, when I traverse that path, the left
In
side
which
will be the inner.
direction? So do you understand that there is some business of what? You're going along that, you're walking along that path with your head upright, okay? And with your nose pointing in that direction. And when your head is upright and your nose is pointing in that direction, then this region is on your left. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So this has something to do with your head and your nose and your left. Okay. And you understand that that has something to do with right-handed orientation. One is your, can you see this now? How do I show this to you? Okay. So it's not showing correctly. This is my, my God, does this also invert everything? When I look at that, that is pointing to me, it is pointing to the left, but to you also it's pointing to the left, I suppose. Do you understand this has to do with the right-handed orientation that you have? You've learned this in 11th standard about a right-handed orientation and a left-handed orientation. Okay. So anyway, the point here is actually, this is actually quite interesting. Okay. Orientation. And there's quite a bit to understand when you're talking about orientation. And so what is the moral of the story? The moral of the story is you walk along that path